technically, this week's slate of college football games isn't as loaded as last weekend's slate. I mean, there isn't an Indiana-Oregon caliber matchup, that's for sure. But there are plenty of big games, and within the Big Ten, where I think the drop-off in quality matchups is especially noticeable, we have a must-win game for each of these teams that we're talking about today, being Washington traveling to Michigan. Neither of these teams are ranked, though both are on the cusp of being ranked, and a win here I think will propel either of these teams into the top 25. Washington's 5-1, 2-1 in Big Ten play. Michigan's 4-2, and also 2-1 in Big Ten play. They're tied right now with Oregon and some others for fourth in Big Ten conference play. This will be a noon Eastern time kickoff. Very critical because since Washington's from the Pacific Coast, they'll be kicking off at 9 a.m. local time, which I think is very unfair for the Huskies. It would be the same if Michigan were kicking off at 11 p.m. Eastern time over in Husky Stadium. I think that with the Big Ten expansion, whenever there's a crossover game like this, if there is a Pacific time zone team involved with an Eastern time zone team involved, kickoff should be no earlier than noon Pacific time, and it should be no later than 5 p.m. Pacific time. So no later than 8 p.m. Eastern time and no earlier than 3 p.m. Eastern time. Before we talk about this game, sorry for that little tangent there, but I do think it's necessary, and that will bring more competitive balance and be more that'll bring more pleasure to both fans in the Pacific Coast and in the Midwest or East Coast for Big Ten Nation. Make sure that you like the video. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure that you have hit the notification bell. Do those things. I would very much appreciate that. And also, watch the video all the way through. Hit the notification bell for the Michigan and Washington football playlists that are linked down below in a reply to the pinned comment. And comment your preview, your prediction, and your thoughts on this game. I would love to hear it. But this is a must-win for both the Huskies and the Wolverines, because the Huskies, they're not as well known as Michigan. They don't have the same brand. They're kind of outside of their footprint, being in the Big Ten, traveling to this game. They don't have the same fan base size. But based on what I see from Washington fans, and also looking at how they're 5-1 to this point, they've won a close game over Maryland. They beat Rutgers to a pulp. They played competitively with Ohio State for about 35, 40 minutes in the game. Ohio State's just that good of a team, and they had matchup edges over Washington that were never not going to be exploited by a coaching staff and team of that caliber. It's the same thing if they played, I think, Indiana or Alabama or many of these other top-end schools. Michigan's not one of them, though. They aren't. I think Michigan fans will tell you that. And Oregon could be, but that's also that's a rivalry game. So even if they are the caliber that Ohio State is, in rivalry games, very weird things can happen, and maybe Washington's better at the end of the year. Maybe they've learned some lessons that they didn't know about themselves earlier in the year. So they have a chance to reach the playoffs still. I mean, even if they lose to Oregon, if they beat everyone else but lose to Oregon, even if it's in a similar fashion they lost to Ohio State, they could be in the playoffs. If Michigan wins this game and wins out, they're definitely in the college football playoff. So this is a must-win, much like I think USC Notre Dame. If either of these teams want to be in the playoff conversation, they must win here. And I want to talk about Washington first. We typically go with the away team here, as they're facing more circumstantial adversity. They can't really control the fact that they are playing on the road. That's just how things work. You know, if you play annually, you flip the site every year. If you don't, then sometimes that's just how these things happen. So we like to lead in with the road team. And Washington here, crushing UC Davis as expected, had to pull away late from Wazoo, but buried them with the final score. Played a little bit too close for comfort against Colorado State. close win over Maryland. They snowballed Rutgers in a very similar way they did Washington State, where Rutgers in the trenches controlled that game for the first half, but Washington's vastly more athletic and superior QB play and being at home eventually gave them, along with the fact that they didn't need to convert on fourth down, and Rutgers did, and they didn't always do that, so they had a lot of empty drives in Washington territory. They snowballed and eventually pulled away from it. Looking at this schedule, so they play Michigan on the road, and then they get Illinois at home, and that's going to be very tough. That's a tough 2-game series. But if you beat Michigan on the road, why couldn't you beat Illinois at home? You should beat Wisconsin handily. Purdue and at UCLA, you should win those games. Doesn't mean you will, but you should win every game remaining on your schedule outside of Oregon and at Michigan at this point. The record Washington should go with, based on their power ratings, their 22nd in FPI, based on their S&P Plus, based on how Vegas is favoring Michigan here, the sports books are favoring Michigan. Washington should go 9-3, and if not 9-3, probably 10-2. That's probably what Washington should go. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and how they can captivate that opportunity starts with a win in Ann Arbor. How do they captivate that opportunity in Ann Arbor? How do they captivate it? How do they win? Well, I think that in order for Washington to win, what they need to do is they need to stop Michigan's ground attack, which the good news is for Washington, analytically, they're only allowing about 4 yards per carry. They're allowing fewer than 100 rushing yards per game. Now, what I will say is they've played Maryland, who can't run the ball. Rutgers has really struggled to run the ball. Any of their non-Big Ten opponents, well, that's expected that you would prevent them from running the ball. And Ohio State is one of the best teams in America. Running the ball is anything but their forte. It's their biggest weakness, is their rushing offense. So I think some of that is due to who they've played, but I don't know that for sure. I mean, you could also make the argument that the only reason Michigan has an elite rushing offense on paper is they get a bunch of big runs, but if you can stop the big runs, their rushing attack is actually quite average. There's an argument to that too. They need to stop the run. They need to, I would say, make sure that you keep Michigan's defense off schedule. The offense, of course, keep off schedule, but Michigan's offense could do that to itself. What I'm talking about is, if you're Washington, I think you let DeMond Williams play loose, and I think that you go off script at times. But also, against Michigan's defense, if they are lining up in 5-2, or if they are really trying to get after you with pressure, get the ball out quickly. You don't want DeMond Williams holding on to that thing too long. Yes, he can make some things happen, of course, but Michigan's, pass rush and their defensive front is better than Rutgers. It's better than Maryland's, and Maryland shut out Washington for a half there. So I think that getting the ball out quickly, not being predictable, unless something's really working, and making sure that you stop Michigan's ground attack, those are the keys to victory. And a fast start, too. You don't want to give Michigan a chance to set in control, because I don't think they would blow a controlled lead in the way that Maryland would. Maybe I'm wrong, though. DeMond Williams Jr., Denzol Boston, Roebuck, one of their younger receivers. It's a passing attack that is among one of the nation's most effective. And then you have Jonah Coleman and Adam Muhammad, who are assisting the Washington Huskies to have a 47.6% rushing success rate. Also, they average 9.02 yards per drop back, and they average a gain of 0.41 expected points added per drop back. They are top 10 in both those categories, top 5 in EPA, expected points added per drop back. It's a very successful offense coordinated by Jed Fish, headed by head coach Jed Fish. He's their offensive mind. And defensively, Ryan Walters, I think he's done a good job with the defense in year one, should be better next year. maybe Washington's defense. I haven't highlighted it in many of the key stats here because I do think it's the weaker side of the ball, and I do think it's the more inflated side of the football. Meaning in big games, in big moments, I think the defense is more likely to crater than the offense. But I could be wrong there. They have a huge chance against this Michigan team whose offense is very limited to running the ball, and if Underwood makes a great throw, and then if his receivers can catch, they can have at least a competent passing offense, but it's very inconsistent, extremely inconsistent. Moving on to Michigan here. Michigan is ahead of Washington slightly in the power ratings. They're at home, they have the travel edge, and they're forcing Washington to kick off very early at a time they're not used to kicking off at. Michigan has the advantage in a game like this where if Rutgers can control the lines of scrimmage against Washington for a half, and that was with them traveling over to Husky Stadium, you in theory should be able to control the trenches for all 4 quarters and masterfully control them. Doesn't mean they will. Also doesn't mean they won't, though. I think we can all definitively say that USC, and I would have said this before last Saturday's game, that USC has a better offensive line, they have a better defensive line than Washington does. In a lot of respects, I think Washington is kind of a knockoff version of USC with a more dynamic quarterback in exchange for having, an even thinner roster at almost every other position and not the same lines of scrimmage play. Now, Michigan's high missed tackle rate is a good sign for Washington. But for Michigan, the fact is you've played USC and Oklahoma, who by power ratings are unanimously better than Washington and better on defense, I would say, especially Oklahoma. USC's more debatable, but their defense matches up better with Michigan than I think Washington's does. And then Nebraska on the road. Nebraska's about what Washington is, just about. I don't know which is better. I would probably side with Nebraska at this point, and it helps that you host Washington. You don't have to play them on the road as you did Nebraska, USC, and also having to play Oklahoma on the road. Michigan here, what you need to do is you need to see if you can establish the run early. And then if you do that, you mix in play action, you mix in letting Underwood go off, try to do with Underwood, whether it's in the ground game or in the throw game, maybe let him unleash in a little bit like Washington has to do with DeMond Williams every week, although to this point I think Williams is a better player than Underwood. See if you can establish control on both sides of the lines of scrimmage, and I know it's not going to be heard, but you do not, I think, want to pressure. You don't want to send heaves of blitzes against this Washington offense, not because they will just kill you through the air. They could easily do that. It's the idea that if you over pursue, DeMond Williams could take it to the house from his own 25-yard line. He's that fast, he's that nimble, that athletic, that elusive. He's absolutely incredible. He's their best offensive weapon. So defensively, I think keeping things in front of you and being more conservative here and forcing him to process and letting him hold on to the ball for maybe a little bit longer in exchange for not letting him rush downfield, I think that's a good strategy defensively. And offensively, see if you can test their rushing defense, see if you can move them off the point of attack. If you can't, then that's huge for Washington, but at least try it initially. Michigan's averaging 6.39 yards per carry. They're top 10 there. They only allow a 33.3% rushing success rate. When you get past Michigan's D-line and get to their linebackers and DBs, you'll have success in the ground game. But it is a hard thing to get past their defensive line, and that's what that success rate does show. USC was the only team so far who was able to consistently move the ball against Michigan's front consistently and win. Big part of that is their running backs are fast. Another part of it is they were getting Michigan in the passing game and just they read that defense like a book, and they were willing to run side to side, vertically, downhill. I mean, their rushing attack is awesome. I don't think Washington's is as good as that USC ground game is, at least in terms of running back and offensive line. What you have to be careful of is Williams is a much better runner of the football than Jade Mayav is, whether in improvised or designed runs. Michigan also has a weakness at defending the pass. It's a game where I think you can justify different matchups that either heavily favor Washington or heavily favor Michigan. You can do that. I believe here that given the time change and given the travel and the fact that Michigan, the reason USC was able to blow them out, and Washington will probably have to play a much better game than Michigan, I think, to beat them, given the trip, they dominated Michigan at the lines of scrimmage. And I don't know if any of you have watched Washington, but I have. They obviously didn't win the lines of scrimmage against Ohio State, but the fact they struggled at times the way they did there against Maryland and Rutgers would be concerning to me. So I do think Michigan wins. I do think they cover. I think there is a bit too much love surrounding Washington analytically. I think a lot of that has to do with one player. Now, can Michigan stop that one player? I'm not confident that they will exactly. However, at the same time, I do think he has his limitations, and his supporting cast isn't amazing. And look, part of the reason why I think Ohio State did such a good job stopping him isn't just because of schematics. That's an area that, they and Michigan aren't close there right now. I think another part of it is just the fact they owned Washington's O-line on a consistent basis. Sometimes Washington's O-line beat them, sometimes, but a lot of the times they just straight up attacked them in the trenches and Washington couldn't do anything. And when you have that big physical edge, it's hard for even great players to escape that. And Michigan, in terms of defensive personnel, does not have what Ohio State does, but it is closer to what Ohio State has than what anyone else on Washington's schedule has had. You add in the road trip, you add in the fact that I think Michigan has a strong enough ground game to test this Washington run defense, and I ultimately think that Michigan wins. I think they cover. I think that Michigan wins by anywhere from 1 to 3 scores is kind of what I'm thinking. I would be a little bit shocked if Washington wins. I would also be shocked if Michigan comes out and just, beats Washington by 4 or 5 touchdowns and it's game over by halftime or the third quarter. And by shocked, I mean a little bit shocked. If Washington wins, it'll be, oh, wow, they did it. But it's not insane to think that Washington can win here. It's not a double-digit point spread. I just think that Michigan will be able to do well enough with their pass rush to defend the pass. I don't think Washington will run the ball all that well. And I think Michigan will do a good enough job running and with Underwood be okay enough in passing to move the football. I do like Washington's staff more. I think Michigan, though, is the better overall team. And the last thing I'll mention here is looking at the standings. You have an opportunity to cement your shot of being a playoff contender in November with a win here. Michigan wins here. They're probably going to win the following week at Michigan State, given what's happened to that team. And then you enter in November, already going bowling. Your games against Purdue, Northwestern, and Maryland should all be wins, and then the Ohio State game is what decides it. For Washington, a win here, and look, you got Illinois, Purdue, UCLA, and you also have Oregon. That's what you have remaining on your schedule. I think maybe one more team. Yeah, definitely one more team. I forget who that is. Oh, Wisconsin. But realistically, you're only going to lose to at most 2 of those teams if you beat Michigan, if not just one, and that would likely be Oregon at home. So you win this game, you could even lose to your rival at the end of the year and still get in. This is going to be an exciting game. It's going to be a great game. I think Michigan wins and covers due to having a advantage at the lines of scrimmage that the only teams that have really been able to beat them in the trenches are an Oklahoma team with an elite defense and defensive line and a USC team that, when healthy, and they were, has a wonderful offensive line, and they have size on the defensive line, and actually enough quality depth there. So I think Michigan will win and cover. It's a tough spot for Washington. I'll be very impressed with them if they win. Make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.